In the news this week, the issue of sex-selective abortions has once more been highlighted. A new prenatal test can uncover a child's gender as early as 8 weeks gestation, and many parents have been using this information to determine whether their child lives or dies. Wait, no, that kind of sounds a bit odd. Oh, I see my mistake. I called the unborn a child. No, this BBC headline sets my mind at rest. Labour calls for ban on early fetus sex test. Yeah, that's right. I forgot. We don't decide whether our child lives or dies. Who does that? We decide whether a fetus lives or dies. Got to admit, that does sound a heck of a lot better. Whew. Dodged an ethical bullet there. The article goes on. This non-invasive prenatal test, NIPT, is used by the NHS to test for genetic conditions, but people can pay for it privately to discover a baby's sex. Hang on. I thought it was a fetus. Now it's a, hang on, now it's a baby. Is anyone feeling a little bit queasy about that? I mean, maybe the unborn are babies. Like, come to think of it, I don't say to my pregnant friends, you know, how's the fetus? You know, how's your clump of cells? Have you felt your product of conception kick yet? This changes things, don't you think? I've just got this funny, woozy, kind of yucky. Ooh. I mean, because if it's an unwanted clump of cells, let's get rid of the cells, right? And if it's a product of unwanted conception, let's clear up the mess. But if it's a baby, I'm starting to feel a little bit queasy about killing her. I mean, it, right? Except that it has a gender, right? Pronouns are hard these days. So we can kill products of conception, we can kill fetuses. These days, we've even found ourselves killing babies. But thankfully, we have found it within ourselves to draw the line at killing little baby girls, because that definitely feels a little bit. Oh, do you get that feeling just in the, I don't know what to call it. I want to say it's wrong, but I don't want to get judgy. It just feels like killing little baby girls is the bad kind of killing, you know? But, oh no, look, the Shadow Minister for Equalities agrees with me. Oh look, Labour MP Naz Shah said it was morally wrong, see, for people to use the test to abort pregnancies based on the outcome. Good. You know, we mustn't abort because of the child's gender. That is morally wrong. Well, I'm glad someone's finally had the guts to say that, because I've kind of been feeling conflicted about that whole killing little girls thing. Phew. So Ms. Shah goes on in the article, NIPT screenings should be used for their intended purpose to screen for serious conditions such as Down syndrome. Kind of getting the woozies again here. What is that feeling? It's really hard. So Naz Shah, the Equality Shadow Minister, says that if they have XX chromosomes, they are our precious little girls who are worthy of all protection. If they have an extra chromosome, terminate with extreme prejudice. Because you know that even before this non-invasive test, 90% of parents who discover Down syndrome in their babies, fetuses, 90% of parents who discover Down syndrome in their fetuses do in fact abort. And that percentage is only set to rise with the advent of this test, recommended by Naz Shah, Shadow Minister for Equalities. So let me see if I got this right. It is bad screening to eliminate on gender. It is good screening to eliminate on disability. That's a good use of the screening tests. But, you know, there's something that doesn't quite sit right with me about that. I can't put my finger on it, but I think I see the logic, because, you know, a couple of years ago we filmed a Christmas video of those with Down syndrome. I can't help but think it's those people that the test is designed to screen out. And that is the good screening. The bad kind of screening, the screening that is based on gender, has been called gendercide. That is a powerful word for it, right? Screening out those according to gender is gendercide. Gendercide, that is That's bad, right? So what should we call it when we screen out those according to their genome? I know. Let's call it genocide. Genocide. That's it, isn't it? It's genocide. But it's the good kind of genocide, right? The good genocide, right? Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Naz. I was starting to feel a little bit, bad and queasy, but with the help of these antacids, I think we've cleared that up. Yay, good genocide. I'm Glen Scrivener, and this is Speak Live. You're watching the LIVEcast.
LIVEcast, welcome to the LIVEcast, welcome to the show. LIVEcast, welcome to the LIVEcast, welcome to the show.
Stuttering, or are we smooth?
Yeah, we've been having lots of problems with our videos that we've been playing through our system. We're not quite sure why they're going all juddery.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, because we're not doing anything different from what we've done before, so...
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there, and we will release a non-juddery version of that.
Of the monologue.
Of the monologue, the Gendercide
monologue.
The good kind of genocide. No. Yeah. What was that movie you were referencing?
It just reminded me of Hot Shots Part 2.
Part 2.
Where the guy turns to the camera and he goes, "War, it's fantastic."
Fantastic. Genocide. You don't want the wrong kind of genocide.
No, you need the good genocide. Yeah, absolutely, not the bad one.
I'm glad that Naz Shah, Shadow Minister for Equalities.
Yep, she's on it.
She's on it.
Didn't you say something as well, like she's the Shadow Minister of Equalities, and wasn't she...
She was banned from the Labour Party for anti-Semitism.
Right, yeah.
Not saying there's a link. I'm not. I'm just saying.
Oh dear.
She said things about the Jews, and now she's. I'm not drawing the link. I'm just. When you Google her name, those are the
things that come up.
Yeah.
Well, so I saw that article yesterday on the BBC News over breakfast about this prenatal screening over gender and how the Labour Party say you should ban people who want abortions based on the gender. And obviously, I mean, it's crazy that we're at a point where people would even be thinking along those lines, but of wanting to do it, not ban it. The thing that immediately popped into my mind, though, was just, it seems bananas that we're living in a society that says you can screen a fetus.
Yes.
They want to call it that, a clump of cells, as many people would want to call it. You can screen that clump of cells for gender and find it out at however many weeks.
8 weeks gestation.
8 weeks, yeah. But yet, gender is a social construct assigned at birth and is fluid and can change.
Yes.
So, if you were a little girl,
you'd
want to say, but surely by society's views, I mean, they might identify as a boy.
They might identify, and I think that's the smart move. Okay, so any young people listening, if you are preborn, I wouldn't ordinarily recommend this, but for you guys, please just try to transition, identify as male, and you'll be fine, absolutely fine. Just don't, whatever you do, be disabled, because we can't protect you anymore. Sorry about that. Unless you identify as non-disabled, and then I don't know. Who knows? Who knows?
I wonder though. Do people see how these things do cross over?
Yeah.
Or whether for some people they're just looking at this issue and going, well, there's one thing over there, and this transgender thing is a completely different thing. Yeah. Or the gender identity stuff is completely different.
Right.
You're going, well,
right. And then the sexuality thing, which. I mean, certainly the gay community has not always had a united front on this question, but at the moment it seems to be you're born that way, right?
Yeah.
And no doubt we are just 6 months away from discovering the gay gene, and you are born that way, right? So that is absolutely a fixed, natural, physical, biological state. Your gender is totally fluid, even though it's written into every single cell of your body.
Yeah.
And then if you have an extra chromosome, sorry.
Yeah,
you don't qualify.
No.
That's, And so what's interesting is that I think the issue of screening for Down syndrome does hopefully evoke something of a moral conscience in our culture. Like, there is some stirring of, oh, I don't know what that feels like, but there's this weird kind of woozy. Maybe it's wrong. Like when we start to talk about screening out an entire population.
I don't know if there is though.
Right. We've kind of moved on. Like 2 years ago, Sally Phillips did the A World Without Downs documentary.
I'm not sure. I think most people wouldn't give it wouldn't give it a second thought. I'm sure that if you're in that situation, you don't just go fine straight away.
Right.
Let's abort. But I don't think maybe the average person just hears, when they want to screen out things like Down syndrome, and they go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure people do kind of go, ooh, bulk at it.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe only
2 years ago, that documentary came out, and it was a massive talking point. But now, 2 years later, this is when they're actually implementing that non-invasive prenatal test, right?
And who's the guy? Because I mean, I think the kind of stuff that pricks people's conscience a little bit is like seeing things like that video, like the He Came Down, where you're seeing people who have Down syndrome.
Yeah.
But then there's the MP, isn't there? I don't know if he's an MP or who he is. I don't know his name.
Okay.
Who's got Down syndrome?
Okay.
And he's spoken in Parliament.
Right.
I'm not sure. House of Lords or House of Commons. I'm not sure. Probably Commons. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But he's kind of stood up and talked about this, hasn't he? And saying like,
right.
Trying to wipe. People like me wouldn't be here.
Right.
And stuff. And I think when you see stuff like that, and it kind of humanises it for people, then it kind of.
Yeah.
But when you just read an article about generic Down syndrome child number 42.
Yeah.
I'm not sure people do.
And then Naz Shah kind of says, "Oh, we draw the line at gendercide, but the reason why we have these is to screen out Down syndrome," and that's just dropped into the article. No comment is made on that. I'm not picking up on what other journalists are saying about that. I'm just picking up on this one sentence that's dropped in, where she basically says the bad kind of screening is for gender, the good kind of screening is for Down syndrome, and let the chips fall where they may. And it seems like the big kind of ethical dilemma we were having 2 years ago has just totally been forgotten. These NIPT tests that can be done at 8 weeks of gestation, they are now just going to be rolled out in the coming month for this. And so fine, let's go the way of, in the Scandinavian countries that have brought in this NIPT thing, 100% of parents abort. 100%. So, like, in Iceland, you just can't find people with Downs anymore.
Yeah.
So is this a way of maybe starting to talk to people about the abortion issue? Like, can we find common ground with people? I mean, that was one thing we were trying to do in 2016 when we did the Christmas video, He Came Down. We were trying to, again, enter into a world in which everybody's got Down syndrome. I don't know if you've seen it, He Came Down, but in fact, why don't we play the clip and you can see what we're talking about.
Of all she goes through, it's not her plan, it's God's plan. She just goes with it. She's humble, she's calm, she's reassured by the fact that everything's going to be okay.
For he has remembered me, his lowly servant. From now on, all the people will call me happy. He has brought down mighty kings from the throne and lift up the lowly.
What we learned was that God was with us. God suffered with us, and He gave us the most beautiful child. And there was no reason for me to grieve or compare her or feel sorry for her. In my old view, before she taught me, I thought she would lack. She's not lacking.
So gathered around that wee baby boy, all people are welcome to know heaven's joy. From angels to donkeys, from shepherds to king, the little Lord Jesus, God's welcome He brings. He came to our darkness from heaven above. He stooped to the crib and the cross out of love. He shared in our weakness and mess, and still He embraced us nevertheless. If you're feeling rejected, excluded, a stranger, remember the one who came down to the manger.
So that was our attempt in 2016 to again humanize the issue and show an entire world where the shepherds and the angels and the three wise men and Jesus himself all have an extra chromosome. And I think it's a way of showing it really is a gospel issue, in that the gospel is all about the Most High who stoops down to become the little guy, the weak, the one who needed protecting. And in his kingdom, it is all about the toppling of those on their thrones and the lifting up of those who are lowly. And I just think this whole idea of screening people out of our populations is the very opposite of that. It is the survival of the fittest and the sacrifice of the weakest. Whereas the gospel is the sacrifice of the strongest for the survival of we the weakest. So are there ways that we can be heard on this issue that are kind of gospel shaped? Because it's difficult, isn't it? As soon as you talk about this issue, it's a very tense culture clash moment. And how do you make sure that you don't come across as just a moralist? How do you actually make it a gospel thing? What do you reckon? Paul,
Thanks,
solve this problem
solve
for
the
us.
issue.
Come on.
I don't know. In honesty, like you say, it's one of those topics that is so what's the word? Explosive, isn't it? That when you talk about it, it's some people find it very difficult to have any kind of conversation about it, a civil dialogue.
Yeah. I
mean, I don't know necessarily about how you make it a gospel issue, but I mean, I think just as we look at, that the stuff they're saying with these screenings, there's stuff where it would seem to me that even just a basic science is pushing you more towards a personhood,
right,
at a younger
right.
stage,
right.
in the growth of the child,
right.
rather than it being a clump of cells.
Right.
You're saying, well, if you can say this is not just a clump, it's a he or a she at 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Is he or she alive? Is
right.
this a life then? And I just think there's avenues there that you could push down just from that side of things.
The science is on your side there.
Yeah, I mean, I read an article, I can't remember who it was now, but a guy was saying he wondered whether in 100 years' time, he felt science was pushing us that way, that we'd see life really starts earlier than we think. And in 100 years' time, he said he wondered whether people would look back and just be shocked that we would even have considered that these babies weren't alive,
right?
And we're doing what we were doing,
right?
Right. But on the back of science,
yeah.
So
I think so. I mean, I did a video when I was in Australia. I was just flying out of Australia, and the airport in Sydney is right next to Botany Bay, and Botany Bay is where Captain Cook first made landfall as he was, exploring the great southern land of Australia. And he's writing in his diary. He was looking through his optical device at the Aboriginals on the shore. And from his distance and through his murky optical device, he couldn't figure out whether they were brown-skinned or they had brown clothing on. But he saw signs of life, signs of civilization. They were cooking, they were washing, they were hunting, they were fishing. So he kind of saw that they were human civilization, but he didn't see it in HD. And there's lots of different tellings of the history of Australia and whether when the white man came it was settlement or when the white man came it was invasion. So I'm wading into the history wars in this. But let's do a telling of the history that says, okay, James Cook looks through his telescope, he sees life, and it's a bit murky and he doesn't quite know, but he probably sees enough to know these are fellow human beings, fellow members of the human family. But actually, here's one telling of the history, is that the white man looked on the Aboriginals and looked on the land of Australia and they said, no, it's terra nullius. Terra nullius, a Latin term meaning there's nobody home. Like, this land is for the taking. There is no prior human claim to this land. Therefore, we white men, we can stick a flag in it and it's ours. And like we all look back on that and we would all say, if that's what happened, then that is horrific. And yet you bring that forward to today and what we have is people looking through optical devices at what is clearly a member of the human family. And as those optical devices get better and better and more HD, surely we are seeing that this is not the genome of the mother. This is a distinct genome, and it is a human genome. This is not a clump of cells. This is a life, and it is a life that is distinct from the life of the mother, and therefore we're not just dealing with the mother's right to choose. We've got two human beings we need to deal with. And let's not look into the womb and say it's terra nullius, right? Let's not look into the womb and say this is an empty place that we can, have sovereign rights over. Because that's just imperialistic, colonialistic nonsense, right? And so, that's one way, that's one analogy, I think, that we can kind of use. And I think more and more. I used to be of the view that things like abortion are sort of moral issues and just distractions from the gospel. And I think more and more I'm thinking, if the gospel is about sin, then that sin is not abstract. There are actual concrete sins that are the sins for which Jesus had to die. And I know that abortion is not in any way, shape or form like the unforgivable sin or the worst of all possible sins. But here's a test case of an entire culture that has kind of nodded and allowed an evil to sort of go on in its midst. And no one's particularly bothered about it. And you just think, well, that's kind of the Bible's view of humanity.
Yeah.
We're kind of okay with it.
And the thing is, though, we watched that video the other day of this guy talking about, 22 reasons not to believe, and he says, he just drops one, they're all pithy and they're not, he's basically having a laugh most of the time.
Yeah.
But he's just like, number whatever, the Holocaust, number, and then he moves on.
Yeah.
And so he clearly looks at something like the Holocaust and says, this is a great evil.
Right.
And he's saying, well, that proves there's no God. The fact that he thinks it's great evil, but yet here we are in a society that after the Holocaust said, never again would we allow someone or anyone to dehumanize human beings to the point where we think it's okay to kill them en masse.
Right.
And we'll go, no, that's terrible. Never again. Right. All the while having abortions.
Right. 180,000
saying they're
a year.
not people.
Right.
These aren't humans. They're not babies. They're not alive, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Or they've got Down syndrome, or so the disabled people, we get rid of them as well.
Right. Sounds a bit like that other thing that happened, but
gypsies, gays,
right.
You just think, how can people not see the similarities there, the parallels?
Peter Hitchens has a chilling quote about this, and I don't usually use it because to say Peter Hitchens is then to lose a lot of people. It's kind of
sure. He's an extreme case.
He's an extreme case, but on this issue, I mean, he said. Let me see if I can kind of remember his words. He says, "We don't need to guess what we would do if we lived in a culture that." That had a Holocaust. We don't need to guess whether we would have been courageous enough to stand up against that kind of injustice. We don't have to guess about whether we would do something. We live through that kind of culture, and we do nothing.
Yep.
And I just think, wow, the Holocaust is just this slam dunk argument. It is this evil that everyone can agree to as evil, and yet what do? We just live through a culture in which we eliminate the weak so that the strong can make stronger, wiser choices. And does the gospel have anything to say to that? Like, my thoughts on abortion, they used to turn to places like Psalm 139, where it says, what does Psalm 139 say? From my mother's womb, you formed me in my mother's womb. Or Psalm 51. Surely I was sinful from birth, sinful from my time my mother conceived me. So I used to go back to the Psalms and kind of say, well, see, life begins at conception. But more and more, I'm going to Jesus to inform my thinking on the subjects. Number one. Jesus was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary. So the beginning of Jesus' life as a man was conception, right? So you go straight to Jesus and you say, okay, Jesus became a man, to use the generic use of the word man. He became a man to save men. He became one of us to save humankind. he became a single cell in Mary's womb to save single cells. He became an embryo to save embryos. He became a fetus to save feti. Such a rubbish word. Why, the only reason we use that word is to distance ourselves morally from whatever that fetus thing is.
Yep.
It's a horrible, let's distance ourselves from the baby that's in that core, that baby, the fetus. You know you're going to do something harm if you dehumanize it first in your language. It's like calling immigrants, a swarm of immigrants is coming towards Europe, and like everyone rightly says you can't dehumanize people and call them a swarm, because as soon as you start speaking of them in an inhumane way, you're going to start treating them in an inhumane way. Well, what do? We call the unborn fetuses, right? But so that's the first thing. When I think about Jesus, I think he became an embryo to save embryos, right? He became what we are that we might become what he is. So I go to Jesus and I go to the cross. So 1 Corinthians 1 says, you can have this theology of glory where you think about wisdom and strength, but we preach Christ crucified. That's the wisdom of the cross and the strength of the cross that actually looks to despised weaklings like us and lifts up despised weaklings like us. And I just think if that message is going to have any implications, and if that message is going to impact anyone in the concrete, it's hard to go past the unborn as people who are, and it's hard to go past the disabled unborn as those who are weak and in most need of provision and protection. And I think a theology of the cross is what informs that. So I don't know, I think there are ways of bringing the gospel to bear on this issue. So yeah, we've had some great comments already on here, and I've lost all of them. So hello Gail Denise, hello David Sweeney, hello Chris Dempsey.
Who's Roger?
And hey Roger. Who's Roger?
Who's Roger?
Say hello, Roger.
My dad's called Roger. Maybe.
Okay. Oh, maybe they're calling you.
I'll pass.
Your dad.
Maybe, because that's a stage I've reached.
That's it. I open my mouth and my father comes out. Isn't that? Oh, doesn't that happen when you start? You make a joke to the waitress in the restaurant, and you're like, oh, no, it's dad humor.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely.
It's happening. So I'm really sorry I've lost the comments. There was some great comments I was going to read out. Anyway,
well, I've got them here if you want.
Oh, what do you got?
Well, Gail Denise said, "How can we care for people if we have none who need our care?"
Right. Yeah, we talk about a compassionate society, but we don't want anyone who needs that compassion.
Yeah.
And we almost think it would be bad for people to have needs. Sally Phillips, when she did her documentary on A World Without Downs, she interviewed this woman who had an abortion because her child was found to be with Down syndrome. And so she had an abortion, and she was unrepentant about it. She didn't regret her decision, even though Sally Phillips was kind of showing her like footage of this gymnastics kind of star, who had Down syndrome, and showing her all these inspirational stories of people with Down syndrome who'd gone on to triumph. And she said, yeah, but they looked like they'd had to struggle quite a bit to get there. I don't want my baby to struggle.
Oh yeah. And I mean, so yeah, I mean, there is this idea that we shouldn't have to struggle or anything. But I mean, just like you obviously, when that woman watches the kind of able-bodied Olympics,
yes,
she just go, well, they just, I bet there was no effort for them. They just Mo Farah just ran, didn't he? Like, I'm sure he never did any work for it. It was never a struggle.
But isn't it interesting? Like we want to eliminate suffering per se, and we never think about what about a struggle towards a goal. What about going down into the valley of the shadow so that you can come up to feasting joy at the end, which is the gospel story? We used to think that was cool, but now we just want the smooth, let's just even watch Netflix till we die.
And even if it's not specifically a struggle, like, I mean, I saw Ravi Zacharias talking about, a woman who had this condition where she couldn't feel pain, or her daughter couldn't feel pain and stuff. Right. And actually how he was saying, the issues that had caused in her life, not being able to feel pain. Yeah. You don't know if you've trodden on a nail. You can actually do quite bad damage to yourself because you don't realise something's hot or burning or whatever. And he was saying, if we can see that even in those, with our kind of finite minds, that pain and suffering can have a purpose that can be useful for us in some way. Right. He said, imagine you know, how much more God has got a perspective on how some of this might be in the world and whatnot.
But
we're just like, it's all bad, it's all wrong. You can't have any possible good.
And therefore, if our supreme goal is to eliminate all suffering, then we have to eliminate all sufferers. Right?
Yep.
So apply that to those with Downs in the womb. Okay, we don't want them to suffer, right? Yep. Even though in every test they come out as the happiest people on planet Earth. Those with Down syndrome are the happiest. And if you know people with Down syndrome, you know what I'm talking about. Absolutely.
This is not really, our technology is not doing very well these days, is it?
Man, we've had a couple of weeks of shockers. Face streak with the thumbs up.
Send laptops. That's right.
Send laptops. If you have a faster laptop, the now steam-powered one.
And he's having to pedal really quickly over there.
He's shoveling the coal in. And here we go.
So what were we talking about?
What were we talking about? Let's go back to the beginning. All right, start again. Where are my antacids?
We were talking about suffering. We were looking at some of the comments. Nick Vujicic. I don't know how far we got before we broke up.
Yeah.
We were saying we both know who he is. Can't say his name.
Yeah. No arms, no legs.
Yep.
No worries. I think that's the name of the video.
Is that his actual? Is that like a slogan he has?
It might even be a book that he wrote, but it's definitely a YouTube video.
Really?
Look up. No arms, no legs, no worries. He's Australian, so no worries.
Good sense of humour.
And
but yeah, we were saying that I've seen a few bits of his, and I mean, people at secondary schools, and just seems to be really inspiring. And you don't look at this guy, and isn't he married? He's got kids and stuff as well. Like, I mean, and you just think, but if you could screen and see in the womb, this is what this person's going to be like. Right. I think a lot of today's kind of view would just be, of course, you terminate the pregnancy, and you just think, Look at this person. And
who do we think that we are that we're making that choice? You know, like, because maybe you see you have a scan and you realize that your child has no arms or no legs, and maybe they go on to live a really limited life. You know, and they're not Nick Vujicic, and they don't travel the world and get married and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
We don't know which way it's going to go, but who do we think we are to make that choice? Whether they live or die, you know.
But there is just no, like I say, there's no boundary to it, really. Because, I mean, you just think, at what stage do you start to, you say, well, look, we can tell now because our science is advanced that actually your child is going to have bad eyesight. You know, and people say, well, of course, that's okay. They can still have a life because they have glasses and contact lenses. But these people with Down syndrome can have perfectly good lives, you know, with often with a bit of help. And actually, there's plenty of people with Down syndrome and people like Nick Vujicic.
Wojciech.
Well, that's the phonetic.
Wojciech. Thank you for doing it.
But they're having
phonetically.
They're having very fulfilled lives. And often very independently as well.
Right.
And that's the thing, when you have, if there's no, where's your moral compass? Like, where's the...
And what is true north? Because if true north is, like, how much pleasure they, you know, is stimulated in their synapses as opposed to the pain synapses. Like, that is such a reduced vision for humanity. And this idea that pain is just a necessary evil and must be eliminated is so chilling. And I think one of the places it pops up is in evangelism, is that, you know, the problem of evil, as we've come to understand it, is really only a kind of a 300-year-old problem. Like only around 1700 there was a Lisbon earthquake that just like decimated Portugal, and like en masse, like thousands and thousands and thousands of people died. But that was not the first earthquake that had ever happened. But people like Voltaire kind of grabbed hold of that, and they then said, "Good God, I think not." And it's only when you get to a certain level of civilization that people start to see evil as just this unconscionable thing that could not coexist with God. And largely it's because we haven't had it so good, and we've never had it so good, and then suddenly you fall from the goodness that you have, and it becomes the most outrageous defeater for Christian faith. And more I'm seeing people like raise the Holocaust, boom, no answer, because we just have lost any category for meaningful pain or meaningful suffering. Which is not to say it's a really glib, easy answer to say that, you know, through the Holocaust you get X, Y, and Z. That's not the argument. But it's just that we've lost the entire category for meaningful suffering, meaningful pain. So one of the upshots of that is that we want to eliminate the sufferer, not just the suffering. And one of the upshots of it is that the suffering question becomes this intractable problem for the Christian that can never be solved. Which, you go around planet Earth and actually most people suffer a heck of a lot more than us.
Yep.
And believe in God a heck of a lot more than us. And the idea that suffering disproves God's...
Don't come with your facts, Glenn. Right.
Facts don't care about your feelings. Gail Denise says, more ethnic cleansing. I think I've taken that out of context, Gail. I don't
That's
think...
the quote on the book.
I don't think she's calling for that.
Well, no, I think a girl said, didn't she, about... she said, what about gingers? You know,
No, what about gingers?
Again,
What
this
about
is all
those
part of
with
this where,
birthmarks?
Exactly. Where do you say...
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. And Mark Chenery, euthanasia is the same issue of not valuing life. It totally is. And I do wonder, we're going to get into this when we start talking about Sam Harris in a second, but I do wonder if in the West we're actually travelling east in our understanding of suffering.
Right.
So an Eastern understanding of suffering is that life is suffering, and suffering kind of comes from attachment to the world.
Yep, okay.
And what you need to do is detach from the world, get rid of ego, and get rid of your false attachments to this
Plastic,
transient
you know.
thing called the world. And then you will eliminate suffering. And in the end, nirvana is actually being so detached from everything that, nirvana means...
Gone.
Did you hear that? Being blown out like a candle, a flame. And you dissolve into the ocean of being like a drop of water in the sea. And the answer to suffering is non-existence. And caring less and detaching more from this world. And that's kind of what you do on Facebook, isn't it? You know, I'm always seeing these memes about, you know, if you're in a toxic relationship, get out of it, man, because you don't need these other people. You don't need pain in your life. You don't need struggle. So love less, everybody. Make sure you love a lot less, and then you won't have so much pain, and you just detach and live by yourself, and you've got your little screen, and that's nirvana, baby.
I saw, because I saw a video of a woman asking the Dalai Lama about suffering, and I'm trying to rack my brains now for what the exact question was she asked. But she said something about like, you know, what can I do when I have like negative thoughts and stuff? And he was his basic response was just remember that reality is not as it seems. So he was saying that's not the way it is, and stuff. But then I was just thinking, like, but you know, you try applying that kind of thinking into, you know, someone who's lost a family member.
Right.
I just remember reality is not as it seems, and
Right.
you're like, well, this is rubbish, rubbish advice.
So if you're grieving, we are very close from being able to have the kind of pill that might stop you feeling the feelings of grief.
Right.
So you've just lost your mum, and you go to the doctor, and let's say you've had a good couple of days to be sad about it, but you go to the doctor and you say, well, I'm feeling really depressed. More and more, I think in our culture, a doctor is primed to say, well, let me alleviate that discomfort. Here, take a pill. And what if there was a pill that could actually stop you feeling the feelings of grief? Now, the feelings of grief are deathly, horrible, horrific, hellish. You don't want to feel those feelings. And so isn't it tempting to then take that pill and then you never grieve your mother, right? And this is the way that we're going. I think it's heading in a very Eastern direction where we can't imagine anything good about grieving, anything good about pain, anything good about suffering, anything good about actually training hard for the Olympics and getting a gold medal, or walking through the valley of the shadow because at the end there's feasting joy. Because we haven't soaked in the Jesus story for long enough, we don't have that perspective on suffering. That yes, we're in the valley, but there's a good shepherd who joins us and who leads us out and meets us in that suffering. So don't just flee the suffering. Cling to Christ in the midst of the suffering. That's the kind of the Christian response to suffering. But more and more, as we're forgetting Jesus, it's just like, you know, beam me up, Scotty. Give me the pill. I just don't want to feel bad anymore. So anyway, this is one issue, and that's why I think kind of the abortion issue kind of fits into so much more than just the issue of what do we do with the unborn. It's about a whole life philosophy and what it is that we value as a culture. So maybe there are ways of engaging this issue in a bigger way, and maybe actually it starts to be an attractive vision when we say there's a church community in which we value the weak, we value the disabled, we value the little guy because God became the little guy for us. And maybe that starts to paint an attractive picture of the gospel. So, we don't have a lot of time left to look at Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, but let's do it quickly, and we can come back to Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson next week. You don't need to know anything about Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson.
Not really, no.
Not really. All you need to know is that Sam Harris is one of the four horsemen of the new atheist apocalypse, very anti-religion in all its forms. Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist, an evolutionary psychologist, who is very enamored of the psychology of Carl Jung, and very respectful of the religious stories that our cultures have been telling over the years, and says that there is much good to be found in the Bible, much good to be found in the Christian myth of Christ the Logos who entered the valley and brings us some kind of salvation. So that's those two men, and they've had a series of discussions, series of debates in Vancouver, in Dublin, and in London. And I just thought that those discussions have been really interesting. They've interested me because I've kind of got an interest in philosophy anyway. And so we've done a couple of videos. We've done 2 already. We've got 3 more to come. And let's have a look at the first clip. And I think it'll really gel together with what we've been talking about heading eastwards in our conceptions of evil and suffering. This is Sam Harris telling us what he thinks about evil and suffering.
The reason why evil is susceptible to total deflation is, if you agree with me, evil is a category of human misbehavior, human intention, that we don't understand significantly at the level of the brain. But if we did understand it totally at the level of the brain, then every evil person we had in the dock at trial would be just like Charles Whitman with his brain tumor after he shot up everyone at the University of Texas, right? So like he's the prototypically evil mass murderer, but he's complaining about this chain that overcame his personality, and he thinks it would be a good idea that if after the cops kill me, you autopsy my brain because I don't know why I'm doing any of this, right? And lo and behold, he had a glioblastoma pressing on his amygdala, and all of a sudden it made sense of his behavior in a way that a full understanding of psychopathy or every other variant of human evil would make sense of it in a way that would be deflationary ethically. Okay. And then you would look at someone like Saddam Hussein, or the worst evil person you could imagine, and you would say, well, he's actually unlucky. There but for the grace of biology go I. Because if I had that brain, if I had those genes, if I had those influences that gave me those synapses, I would be just like him. Now, if you think there's some other element that gives us free will, and now then you and I are disagreeing. That's a factual claim that's at variance with mine. But if we are just on some level malfunctioning biological systems when we're being evil, then a complete understanding of evil would cancel that category.
You see, adopting Sam Harris's framework will abolish the category of evil. And at that point, we are heading towards the relativistic.
Swamp. At that point, we are heading towards the relativistic swamp. That's what I say at that point. So, I think that does gel with what we've been talking about. What we've been talking about is our heading eastwards as a culture when it comes to suffering and evil. And Sam Harris is basically saying, the more you become an atheist, the more you become a determinist about things. Mm-hmm. Because if actually all my psychology boils down to biology, and my biology boils down to chemistry, my chemistry boils down to physics, if I'm just quarks and leptons fizzing,
Yep.
then it's just like the billiard boards. Billiard balls smack into each other, and if you had a great enough supercomputer, you could track the course of every billiard ball ever, and you know it's set in stone. Literally, your destiny is set in stone.
Like Einstein said, didn't he, that if you could have all the information in the world at your fingertips, you could predict absolutely what was going to happen.
Right.
Because it's just simple cause and effect.
Simple cause and effect, all within nature, and there's no other element going on. It's just nature grinding along according to iron laws of physics. And if he's right about that, then I guess determinism does follow. But as he says, that is totally deflationary of this category of evil, because why do you call it wrong? You know, you don't call cogs in a machine that are just turning the way they must turn. That's not wrong.
Yeah. And
it's
I
not
think,
right. It just is, you know.
Yeah, and if you follow it to its kind of logical conclusions, then you lose the right to bring any justice on wrong.
Yeah.
'Cause it's not really wrong.
Yeah.
It's just stuff.
Just stuff.
That happens. And I know Sam Harris wants to push for kind of even though he doesn't want there to be evil, he still wants to talk about that which is kind of good for,
Right. Right.
thriving of society or whatever. And
Yeah.
but you got to question why are those things the good things?
Yeah.
You know, he's saying, well,
Yeah.
society should thrive like this or whatever, but why? You've still got to define why that in itself is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so Roger Marshall comments and says, Sam Harris is not a moral relativist, but the kind of moral absolutism he has in mind is scary. Yeah, good point. He definitely doesn't want to be known as a moral relativist. I mean, he wrote The Moral Landscape, and he's written other books on moral philosophy, which is, they are questionable, all of these books. But he definitely wants to do it because he doesn't want to, drown in the relativistic swamp. And that's what this comment video that I did last week is all about. Sam Harris does not want to be a relativist. And he certainly doesn't want to go down that track towards nihilism. But I do think, as a determinist, it becomes very difficult to... It becomes very difficult to keep any kind of category of good and evil at that point. You just end up talking about biological functioning and biological misfiring, which is not what any of us mean by good and evil.
Yeah.
And then Sam Harris makes the point, well, yeah, but we're just in the West, and you go east and you go towards the Buddhism and Hinduism, and that's kind of the way that they operate. But is it the way that we want to operate, and is it the way that we most naturally respond to the Holocaust?
Yeah.
The friendly atheist is able to say the Holocaust, boom, right? Because that is another way of saying evil.
But you've got to burrow behind that, haven't you? And say,
Yeah.
well, you think it's evil. So we all think it's evil.
Yeah.
But why is that evil?
Yeah.
Why is it wrong?
Yeah.
And people will say, won't they? Oh, well, because you shouldn't hurt other people, or
Right.
It doesn't make people feel good if you do these kind of things to people.
Right.
You say, yeah, but it might make me feel good.
Yeah.
If I was a Nazi, I might enjoy doing those things. I might get pleasure out of it. It might benefit my tribe of people.
And Sam Harris at that point says, "Well, I don't know how to communicate with you. Then you're just insane. I don't know how to communicate with you." And you're like, "Yeah, well, insanity keeps on coming up in human civilization.
Yeah.
And if your theory can't account for the insanity of the Nazi doing that, you don't really have a moral philosophy that's going to be binding on anybody." Last week we had a look at Alex O'Connor, who's the Cosmic Skeptic on YouTube, and he said, of course there's nothing objectively morally evil about the Holocaust, but he says, I hope that I would be able to reason with the Nazi and tell... I'm not making this up, this is exactly what he says. He says, I think I could be able to reason with the Nazi and convince them that actually the Holocaust is not the best for the smooth running of their society, and if he agrees to that, then I've won him over. And you just think, well, I'm not a Nazi, and you haven't convinced me, Alex O'Connor. I don't think you could convince your way out of a paper bag, but you reckon you're gonna argue with and rationalize with the Nazi prison guard.
God, that's a good point, actually. Like, everybody off the train,
Everyone
get back. Like, that's gonna happen.
Reverse the trains, because. But of course, it doesn't work as soon as the Nazi points out, actually, we've made huge scientific advances through actually operating on the Jews. Even today, there are scientific breakthroughs that have come through Nazi doctors experimenting on the Jews. And there's a huge ethical debate about should we even use that information,
Right?
because it's come from torture essentially. But even today, 70 years on, we're still making scientific breakthroughs because we tortured a small minority in the population. So there's the argument that the Nazi brings. There's nothing rationally wrong with that. There's just everything morally wrong. It.
Yeah.
But there's no category for that with Alex O'Connor. No category for that.
It strikes me though that all these people who hold those kind of views, your Sam Harris's, people like that, if you keep pushing, you're going to have to end up with that relative thing. But they just don't want. But they don't want to live their lives like that. Mm-hmm. They don't want to wake up in a world where people wrong them, and there is no recompense. There is no justice on things like that. They still want all these things.
Yeah.
But they just don't want. Well, they just don't want God in it, do they? They don't want an absolute thing above them.
Yeah.
Although it's strange because, like you say, in a sense, Sam Harris does want an absolute. He wants an absolute, but he's got no basis for it.
Right.
'Cause he doesn't want to be relativist. He wants something. He
wants an up and a down on the moral landscape. And in terms of trying to make that calculation, Roger Marshall quite rightly says Sam Harris will invoke AI-generated algorithms. That's the way he's going to measure the well-being that this particular course will achieve versus the harmful being that this particular action will cause. But in the debate, and Roger, I would direct you to my first comment video from last week where I talk about this. Sam Harris admits that actually our measurement of well-being is dreadful, and all measurements of well-being are just not up to the task at all. So he doesn't, so maybe one day there will be AI-generated algorithms that can calculate the utility of my various actions. We don't have that now, and then you've still got to have value judgments as to what it is that you value within that calculation.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to
show.
It's one thing to show that suffering is a bad thing. What about the pleasure I feel in inflicting suffering? Right? I'm feeling pleasure in inflicting suffering, okay? And I do, and I feel pleasure in gossiping, right? There's a pleasure to that.
Yeah.
Right? So how am I going to balance those two things against each other? The pleasure and pain versus,
We've all, at some point in our lives, maybe we felt justified at the time, and maybe we were or were not, but we've all kind of slammed somebody, haven't we, in front of other people, like squashed them and humiliated them.
Yeah.
And it's felt good, hasn't it? To be like,
destroy them.
Put them in their place or whatever.
Yeah.
But of course there's for them the suffering, humiliation.
Feels a little kind of, where's my antacids? Feels a little bad. And what is it that's going to weigh the various utilities against one another? You need a value structure, and that value structure is non-obvious. So Sam Harris cannot get from facts to values. He must have values first before he's even in a position to assess the facts. His entire project is backwards. And that's been pointed out by moral philosopher after moral philosopher after moral philosopher. Sam Harris wades into moral philosophy 2,500 years late as a scientist, as a neuroscientist, and he says, I don't think anyone's ever thought of this before, and he basically brings to the world Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism, which was roundly critiqued in his own day and has been roundly critiqued for the last 200 years, and every single tenet of Sam Harris's moral philosophy has been catastrophically, devastatingly critiqued for 2,500 years.
Yep.
But he wades into this as a scientist, and he manages to get a bestseller out of it. And it's just, he owes moral philosophers a lot of money. Like he owes God a lot of money. He's earned so much money as this neuroscientist who doesn't even engage. He doesn't even engage with Jeremy Bentham, who agrees with him, nor does he engage with anyone who actually would critique his project. And so I am very glad that these lectures, these debates have become prominent, because Jordan Peterson is just pointing out stuff that moral philosophers have been pointing out since The Moral Landscape came out in 2010, and that never gained any traction. But Peterson is at least able to hold Harris's feet to the flames and say your entire project is bankrupt. You can't even do the measurements, which are the very heart of what you think moral activity is based on, and you don't know how you're going to weigh different utilities against one another. It's anyway. So, from that point of view, Harris fails. But I also think that Peterson fails. And next week, we're going to see why I think Peterson fails as well, and why I don't think Christians should throw their lot in with Peterson. Just because Harris is not right doesn't mean that Peterson is right, and that we should jump in with both feet with him. And I'm going to raise some cautions about that next week. So, there we are.
Great.
There we are.
And then we've got these videos coming out, haven't we? So we've got 2 videos so far on Harris and Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
So first one was kind of about the relativism stuff that we just talked about. Second one's about Old Testament wars.
Yep.
That was
Harris
yesterday.
raises an issue, 3 issues really against the Bible. Old Testament wars.
Yep.
That was yesterday's video. Tomorrow.
Is slavery tomorrow, or is it human sacrifice?
Human sacrifice. And then on Friday we'll release a video on slavery.
Slavery Fridays.
Slavery Fridays.
Yep, that's what we do. Human sacrifice Wednesday.
TGISF. Thank God, it's Slavery Fridays. And then on Monday we're going to release a video on why Harris thinks too little of religion and why Peterson thinks too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if that's your bag, get sharing those videos.
And the thing I would say as well is that, you know, if you've not seen, well, you've not seen some of them, but if you've seen the video kind of thumbnails and you've thought, oh, I'm not interested in Jordan Peterson, I'm not interested in Sam Harris, I don't know anything about it. Actually, particularly the Old Testament war one, the slavery one, the human sacrifice one.
Yes.
Those are kind of things that just, there's stuff in there which doesn't matter whether you know these guys or the debates. It's just stuff that in conversation with people, you know, people will turn around and say, won't they? Like, oh, but doesn't the Bible condone slavery, and doesn't God commit genocide and all this stuff?
Order human sacrifice.
Yeah. What about Abraham killing, you know, being told to kill Isaac and stuff?
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things that just crop up
all the time.
Yeah, all the time. So they're really useful just from that point of view. So,
so if anyone's ever asked you about Old Testament laws, wars, slavery, and human sacrifice, you have the answers. So get sharing. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Paul.
No problem. It's been a pleasure.
It's been real. Sorry about the judderiness. Now, we will do a non-juddery version of this on YouTube and then post it on Facebook as well.
Yep.
And this will come out as a non-juddery podcast on Friday.
Absolutely.
So, until then, like, subscribe, and keep speaking life.
Enjoy the videos. Take care. Bye.